What do you know about politics? What should you know? Forget views, beliefs, and opinions. Politics is really a science, and that's where we come in. Welcome to Inside Political Science. I'm Kirby Goidel.
I'm Todd Kent, and we're your guides to what's actually happening in politics. We're using our years of experience to navigate political data, media, money, behavior, and more to educate and inform you.
Welcome to Inside Political Science. I'm Kirby Goidel. I'm here with my co-conspirator, Todd Kent, and we have our guest, co-author, colleague, friend, Cliff Young, president at Ipsos, and also visiting professor at Texas A&M University. And we're here to talk about Nativist Nation, our new book that we're co-authoring together. Just out. You can get your copies online. But before we do that, we wanted to, because you are often briefing policymakers and talking to people about what's going on in the moment, we wanted to know what's going on in the moment. Where are we at this particular time?
Basically, where the heck are we? Right?
Yeah, where are we?
Obviously, we're ending the year. This is the first year for Donald Trump's second term. And I would say we're at an inflection point. You've had this sort of, over the course of this year, he's lost some steam when it comes to his approval numbers, and those are the numbers us pollsters really look at because they really give an idea about a given administration's ability to push forward their agenda. And he's been basically tracking basically the historic average in terms of the decline, because there's some sort of decline on the margins. But over the last few weeks, he's really taken a hit. He's declined by about 3 points. He's at 41% approval rating. That's right at the tipping point. I'd like to say that a 40% approval rating, a sitting incumbent who runs again has about a 50-50 chance. That's the point when you start having problems pushing forward your agenda. And the Trump administration really has a whole host of problems. First and foremost, the economy. The economy is front and center. It's all about affordability. He won on affordability in 2024. He's losing on affordability in 2025. It's very clear in the data. Americans are very worried about tariffs. Especially less affluent Americans are feeling that hit around the margins already. These are not good signs or signals for Trump and his administration. And moreover, I would say the Jeffrey Epstein scandal isn't going to go away. And while all Democrats mostly, or a vast majority of Democrats, already think he colluded in some way with Epstein, what really is the central part of that story is that the Republican base is beginning to have doubts about Trump and the Trump administration because of that scandal.
So you're saying that the scandal is it overriding the economy, or is it just the kind of the double whammy of the economy and then the Epstein narrative?
Yeah, it's first and foremost it's about affordability, and indeed the off-season, off-cycle elections we had in New Jersey, Virginia, and the city of New York was all about that issue, affordability. And Trump and the Republicans are on the wrong side of it. So they're hurting because of that, and I would say that's the central reason why the numbers are weakening. But the Epstein scandal doesn't help. Right. And so it's a nuisance factor, like you were saying. It's there. It won't take him out, but it doesn't shore up his base like he would otherwise. So
if the economy was to turn around in the next couple of months, would we see a Donald Trump turnaround, even though the Epstein scandal is still sitting out there in the wings?
It might help on the margins, but our experience with approval ratings, historically speaking, is that they basically hurt you more than they help you. In other words, the sitting government is hurt more than is helped by a good economy. There's just sort of this attenuated relationship as the economy gets better. Maybe the Trump administration with a good economy would be able to staunch the bleed, but he definitely wouldn't be able probably to get above 45 points approval rating or around there.
But isn't it true though his approval rating's never been that much above 45?
Yeah, but he basically has a high floor, low ceiling. This kind of hyperpolarized moment, whether you take Trump or Biden, their approval ratings on average are lower. but they don't vary as much. They don't decline as much. They don't go up as much. So actually, in a relative sense, he's better than he was in 2017. And I would just discount it a bit and not compare his numbers to, let's say, those of Eisenhower or Truman or JFK.
One more question about the economy. It seems to me like there's a lag between a good economy before it's really reflected in the polls, in job approval numbers. And so what's that lag time in your estimation? I mean, how quick does things need to turn around for President Trump to receive any benefit from a recovering economy?
Well, that's a really good question. We know just in a general sense that in emerging markets, the lag is very small, right? The economy starts hurting, approval ratings start hurting because individuals, let's say in Brazil, India, or South Africa, has less disposable income. In the United States, it's a little bit more fuzzy. It really depends on the numbers you're looking at. So when you're looking at GDP growth or lack thereof, it's about a quarter. When it's inflation, it's probably a couple months, whether it goes up or goes down. And so I really think that when really to begin to become serious about the economic numbers, probably the second quarter of next year is when we really have to keep our eyes on them.
I've been so wrong about Trump for so long, and he continues to surprise me. But the moment also seems interesting to me because it looks like maybe he's finally losing control of his base, or the base is splitting. Because right after he's elected, we see the divisions in the Democratic Party, and the divisions in the Democratic Party are still there. There's still this question about whether they should be more centrist or more progressive left. But we're starting to see those divisions in the Republican Party. I mean, I guess they were always there, but they're really coming out now, and it's maybe he can't control them anymore?
Yeah, I think that there are strong threads there that are pulling at each other, right? So on the one hand, right now, you have the Republican base really at odds with itself about Gaza, about Israel. There's a huge fight about that. About the issue of Jews and Jewish Americans relationship with Israel. That's one, let's say, thread. The other one is Epstein, but Epstein goes to a bigger and broader issue about disbelief in the system, belief that the system is broken. And truly there you have the old establishment Republicans that are less concerned about that. And I would say your new emergent MAGA Republicans, who many are calling themselves no longer MAGA, but America First, are really concerned about these systemic issues, of which Epstein is an example. It's an example of the government and politicians coming clean and being transparent, and they believe that it's not happening now. So so I think there's a lot of friction. I think there's a lot of confusion right now in the base, and indeed, in the off-cycle elections a couple weeks ago, you could see that play out in real time. On the one hand, Democrats are very focused on cost of living, making ends meet, helping people making ends meet, having a very clear economic message, and the Republicans having one that's less strong, less focused, and part of that is because they're kind of in this confusion.
No, when you talk about confusion among the parties, we've been talking a lot on the show over the last few months about how Democrats lack a message, and their message was we're not, we're not Donald Trump and we're not chaos. And so, do the Democrats need to get a message to actually solidify any gains they can make right now, or is it good enough just to kind of be the opposition?
Yeah, kind of let the other side fall apart, right? I mean, part of that is just going to happen if it's going to happen, right? But no, they need to have a message and focus. Running against Donald Trump isn't, necessarily. It might mobilize the base, but it's not necessarily a winning message. Again, I think this focus on affordability is really a way for them to have an answer to a broken system. Republicans have had an answer to a broken system in cultural terms, in terms of immigration, as examples. Trump's been very effective at that. The Democrats have not had a very effective message in relationship to the broken system and how to fix a broken system. I think Mondami and the effectiveness of his campaign really show the way for the Democrats. And I think that, like anything, when things go right, when things are positive, when you have wins, others will copy and imitate you. And I think that will happen in the Democratic Party.
Well, you mentioned immigration and the culture issues, and of course that's the book we've written that contemporary politics has largely been restructured by nativism. That's still in play, right? We haven't left Nativist Nation.
We are in the middle of Nativist Nation. It's all around us. We can keep our heads above water. We're not drowning, but it's there. No. I mean, let's define nativism for everyone first. Nativism is favoring native-born over foreign-born, whether in policy and orientation. It's a very kind of like, I would say, kind of value-neutral definition, right? And ultimately, what we found is that the belief system that things should be more restrictive, that is, things, and to be an American, you basically need to be born in the United States. Maybe you need to be a Christian. Maybe you need to be white. This more restrictive view is a view that most Republicans hold. It's really the mantra that Trump and MAGA has pushed forward. And again, let's call it more restrictive view of what an American is. The Democratic view, the left view is much less restrictive, much more diffuse. And this is our central conflict today. The central conflict in the United States, in our mind, and our book shows this, is that this really defines on what side of the fence you are politically. Yeah. And it ultimately is what motivates us, especially the right from a visceral standpoint, motivates us politically.
Yeah, but it also doesn't mean that the nativists always win, right? Because I think that's one of the keys is that nativism is the driving force, and it's the dividing force between the political parties. But it's not necessarily that one side is going to win and the other side's going to lose. It's that this is the issue.
Yeah, for instance, without a doubt, it's sort of it's the dance between a more restrictive view of what it means to be an American and a less restrictive one. Most probably, but we'll see, the 2026 midterms will probably go Democrat. 2028, the presidential elections, is a Democratic year. Doesn't mean they're going to win. The point being is you could have non-nativists in office in both cases, or in control, moreover. So no, you're right. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win always. It just means that's how we define ourselves, and especially the right defines itself today.
So back in the 2015, we first heard Donald Trump kind of begin to talk about some of these issues. When did you guys first realize that this is a story that needs to be told, and there's more to it than just a candidate talking about the issues?
I think you were on it way before anybody else.
Well, you want to go and tell the story? I don't have to tell the story.
Well, I think it's okay. You're doing the polling, and you see that.
And so, like, stepping back, this is a book that one wants to find what nativism is, wants to measure it. So ultimately, over the course of time, we developed an index to measure it, right? And we want to show its impact on politics, both in the United States and abroad. But that's just all in retrospect. And so, in real time, as a professional pollster, in 2015, we saw Donald Trump sort of rear his head, saying that he wanted to run for nomination on the Republican side. And he had a series of speeches there that were atypical for American politics at the time. They were extremely nativist in orientation. They critiqued different minority groups. Everyone thought at the time that he was dead men walking. There was no way for him to keep on going. But ultimately, what we know now is he kept on going. He not only won the nominations, he kept on going up in the polls. And in parallel, we were testing these things. And so what we did initially was we tried to understand why he had such staying power. So we pinched things and phrases from his speeches. We began testing them in the polls. We found that they had immense resonance, especially the messages that were more nativist in orientation, that is, that favored, native-born over foreign-born. We could call that, in a general sense, more anti-immigrant messages or signals or signs in general. And so that first year, 2015 into 2016, it was really a process of discovery, trying to figure out why Trump had staying power, right? And during that time, we tested, we developed this index, as I said before, and we began seeing how it had, that is, nativism had impact on politics. And we ultimately discovered is that it has this massive weight in defining politics in a general sense, more so than many other factors such as populism or racism or authoritarianism, many others that other scholars and other pollsters thought were more important.
Yeah, and in 2012, after the Romney campaign, Republicans were convinced they had to do better among Hispanic, Latino voting groups. And so the conventional wisdom coming into 2016 was that no one would want to be nativist, no one would want to be anti-immigration on these issues. And you saw this out of Jeb Bush, you saw this out of Marco Rubio, out of Ted Cruz, there was this appeal to these it was a much more pro-immigration appeal, much more softening of that image, and Trump ignored it. And now part of that allowed him to distance himself from the other candidates. If we go back, remember there's 17 candidates on the stage at one point, and so it's able to make him really unique. But this is what, when we were talking about it initially, that I really liked is early on you sort of think this is just kind of a curious sideshow. This is nothing that's going to matter. One of these other candidates is going to emerge, and then the more you look at the data, the more you realize, wait, this is the show. This is the driver.
Yeah, I think that you know, I think you catch the spirit of it. I had this moment in late 2015, like when you're looking at the data, going, okay, like this is for real, right? Yeah. And you know why, right? And I think that we've taken a long time sort of to come to terms with what we're actually seeing, because it's not about Trump. It's really about what Americans actually are feeling and thinking, a big chunk of them. And, you know, ultimately, it took a few years for us to peel away more of the onion to understand, like, what nativism really was. Yes, it's associated with anti-immigrant attitudes. Yes, it's correlated with some of these other things we talked about, authoritarianism or racism or populism, racial grievance and populism, but ultimately it really goes to identity, and it goes to American identity, and how we differentially in America define who should and should not be American. I often say, basically, nativists and non-nativists have two different sets of criteria for who can belong to Club America, and they're quite distinct and quite different.
So when we see kind of some of these exact things happen around the world, they break into two camps. You have the economic opposition and then the cultural opposition. What do you see in the U.S. leaning one way or another, where we look at immigrants and the how we think about them change, because we are a nation of immigrants, but yet all of a sudden you were right that Donald Trump was able to kind of change the narrative of what was going on.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we discuss in the book and talk about in the book is that nativism has a long history in American politics, and it's always there. It's always this latent force, but then there are key moments where it gets activated. And we have a model in the book that talks about this, and so you have to have the right conditions, you have to have the right political entrepreneur, and then the message has to resonate. And all those things came together under Donald Trump. There are always times when this is a constant issue in American politics, but there are times when it really lights fire, and this was one of those moments.
I agree with what Kirby is saying. I would just emphasize that at least all of our research shows that this is really a cultural issue globally,
yes, and
not an economic one. Now, we're not saying that the economics doesn't play a role, but it is primarily a cultural issue rather than an economic one. And it can, once again, it can happen for a variety of reasons. I would argue, we would argue that in the United States and Europe, Western Europe, it's a function of intense and massive immigration. I mean, we're at levels of foreign-born that haven't been seen since the last century. So those are the contextual factors that have really sort of triggered sort of what we would argue is always a latent set of attitudes or beliefs. We're all of us are a little bit nativist. It's just whether we express them or not, and that will be a function of how how the conditions around us, how the world around us threatens us or facilitates us.
You kind of talked about, mentioned a model, nativism nativism activation model. Kind of talk, without getting in the weeds, for our listeners, talk about how you measure this, because I think that's really important as we help us understand what goes into understanding increases or decreases in this idea.
I'll let you take that part.
Well, our nativism activation model is a conceptual model, right? Like all of our hardcore empirics and data crunching is done with our indexes globally, right? We look at nativism over 10 years, or really over 40 years in the United States and over 30 countries, and that's where we spend a lot of our, let's say, that's where all of our statistical prowess and empirical prowess is focused. The nativist activation model is more conceptual. It's kind of it's a conceptual framework just to kind of understand in a general way why these things happen. And so you have once again you have three variables. You have like nativist sentiment, which is normally under normal conditions a latent sentiment. We don't express it openly. It's not expressed in politics. Mm-hmm. The second variable is ultimately the contextual variable. Those are like broad contextual trends, whether it be economic or immigration patterns that can create mostly crises at a given moment. And the third one is a political entrepreneur. Do you have someone or something, an institution, a party, that can take advantage of this scenario? So definitely that model's testable, and that's actually something we're going to do in subsequent papers, is assess that historically and in aggregate across countries. But it served as a conceptual frame in our book just to explain nativism in a general sense.
Yeah, and a big part of it is this cultural dynamic, as you mentioned earlier, that it's this concern that what we think about what it means to be American is being challenged by new immigrant groups, and we can see this historically across different periods. So that's all we have for this part of the episode. When we come back, we'll talk more about Nativist Nation.
Hi, it's Terry Gross from Fresh Air, here with my co-host, Tanya Mosley.
Hey, Terry, I am thrilled to be here.
If you've heard Tanya on Fresh Air, you know she brings so much knowledge, experience, and warmth to the in-depth long-form interviews that Fresh Air is known for. Tanya, I'm so glad we get to do this together.
Me too, Terry.
Join us weekdays on Fresh Air.
From NPR and WHYY.
Weeknights at 6 on KAMU-FM.
Want a sneak peek of what's new on KAMU each month? Subscribe to our email newsletter, a free, exclusive preview of what's to come, featuring monthly updates on new and returning TV and radio shows, binge-worthy KAMU Passport programs, and community events for you to attend. It's the best way to stay up to date on all things KAMU TV and FM. Visit tx.ag/KAMU newsletter and subscribe today.
Welcome back. We're talking about Nativist Nation, and Todd, you had a question.
Yeah, we talk about some of these variables that you mentioned, and those are very interesting as you build your model. How do we give us some kind of ideas? How do we know when something's increasing or decreasing? What do you grasp onto to kind of help us to say, yeah, I see this as happening?
I think the key with that question is it's less about increasing, and actually if we look at nativist attitudes over time and the nativist index over time, what we see is nativism is declining slightly. But where it's increasing, is that it's becoming way more important as a divider of partisanship. And so if you go back to 2004, you have almost no division in terms of the political parties on the nativism index. By the time you get into 2016, you have a really wide gap. And a lot of this is Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't doesn't create nativist sentiment. What he does is he realizes there's this group of voters out there that's feeling concerned about immigration, that's feeling concerned about the world, that feels like the country is no longer the place they grew up in, and he taps into that and he pulls them into the Republican Party. On the Democratic side, the Democratic Party has become more pro-immigration. So it's just this incredible gap between the parties moving forward, and that's why it's the driver of politics.
Yeah. So if you look back at the last election, was it the Donald Trump's ability to get this message across, or was it the Biden administration had really opened the borders a lot more than previous administrations? So Trump really just jumped on that sentiment and used it to his advantage. I mean, so who really was the driver there?
Well, I would say both the Biden administration as well as Trump on the campaign. I mean, ultimately what we know is about 33% of Americans, about a third of American adults are highly nativist. They're strong nativists, right? And then you have another 20% that are nativist adjacent. They'll come and they'll go depending on the issue, depending on the moment. And then you have, another, let's say, third or so that are sort of in the middle, and the other ones are really very non-nativist. So the point is, you need to create some sort of coalition on the right between nativists and, let's say, nativist adjacent, and not defending the border. And not defending the border strongly is a problem. It really kind of opened up the floodgates for Trump and for the Republican Party, and it was really an unforced error by the Biden administration.
Yeah, and if you place it in the context of the model we were talking about, the border itself becomes this condition, right? This catalytic condition, this contextual factor that plays in and makes nativism have greater resonance. An unforced error, I think, is a good way to put it. Had Biden come in and said, let's secure the border, and then let's talk about immigration in terms of legal immigration and maybe expanding the rights in terms of legal immigration, maybe that's a winner in a counterfactual world. But he didn't do that, and so he left the issue on the table for Trump. And you can see the issue in 2020. One of the reasons Biden is able to win is because immigration is not off the table, but it's not as prominent because of COVID. By 2024, it's the driving issue again.
So do you is there kind of the crux of the matter foreign-born citizens of the United States that kind of drive this, that maybe U.S.-born citizens are losing out? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one way to look at it. I'd look at it more like, a set of Americans, let's say more natives Americans, look at America today, and they don't recognize it, and they don't recognize sort of the characteristics of belonging, like who should belong and who shouldn't, and they react to it. Whether it's a direct sort of kind of quid pro quo, zero sum sort of, I feel like I'm losing but someone else is coming. There is that sort of attitude there, but I would say it's much more visceral and fundamental when it comes to group belonging, and ultimately the right's kind of rejection of their perception of open borders.
Yeah, the fear, I think, or the cultural part of that is that nativists are looking and they're saying there are new people coming into the country. They don't speak the language. They're not adopting to American values. They're different, and they're trying to change the culture that we live in. And so we've seen this historically across different groups. Currently, it happens to be primarily Hispanic, Latino immigrants. But if you go back, at one point it was Catholics, Germans, Italians, Irish. But it's always the same sort of factor. These new groups are coming in. They're coming in they're big groups, and they're coming in and they're challenging our understanding of what it means to be an American.
I think today I was reading a mayor up in Michigan said, well, you need to get over the idea, or get beyond the fact that there is call to prayer, and you're going to hear it 5 times a day. And and so you hear complaints about that's not the Michigan I grew up in, and that type of thing. So is that kind of
that's the feeling that the culture that they grew up in, that the America that they grew up in, is being lost as new groups of people are coming in.
Yeah, I would just add also onto that. I agree with all that. Like add on to that the more nativist Americans that we analyzed in our book also feel that they haven't been a part of the decision making that's caused the change. They don't feel like they're part of, ultimately whatever consensus was had, or whatever decisions are being taken, they're not part of that. So there's this sort of perception, though they wouldn't articulate it like this, but there's this perception that the social contract is broken down. What is the social contract around immigration?
So now when you get to the fundamental part of this, who's American? How do they define an American on both sides?
Yeah, it's
what do you want it specifically,
no,
right?
Well, I'm just saying,
Do you want to go?
No, I was just going to say it's this idea of inclusive versus exclusive, and so on the nativist side, it's very much limited in terms of a few. It's a very limited definition of who counts, right? And so it's about where you're born, it's about ancestry, it's about language, it's about ideals. On the left, on the non-nativist side, it's more about just about these ideals, right? If you come over, it doesn't matter what your birthplace origin. You can be an American if you come and support American values.
Yeah, let me give you an example. I mean, to kind of reinforce that point. So you take a 20-year-old that's lived here almost their entire life, but they weren't born here, but they came here illegally, let's say. They speak perfect English. They went to college even. For all intents and purposes, they do American things. A nativist would say they're not American. They weren't born here. They don't have a legal right to be here. They shouldn't be here. And a non-nativist, and that's a more restrictive definition of what an American is, a non-nativist would have a more diffuse definition, which would be, it doesn't matter that this person wasn't born here or even is a legal immigrant, because all the cultural trappings around them, who they are, they're definitely an American. And so it's just using an example to kind of show the differential way that people see being an American. I think it's encapsulated in that example.
So when it comes to politics, you guys alluded to the fact that this is a dividing line. So would we argue that President Trump won the argument in the last election, talking about borders, and that was his way of kind of getting at some of these issues, that he was able to galvanize enough voters to win the election?
Yeah, I would say that in 2016 he won on immigration. In 2020 he lost on COVID. In 2024, he won on affordability. That said, in all three of those elections, immigration was a critical way to mobilize his base, right? And so I would say, while it wasn't the primary reason he won in 2024, it was inflation and affordability, it definitely shored up his base. And he had very clear proof points, like the wall in 2016, that he could use and sort of hammer home.
So does time heal political wounds? I mean, over time, are we going to see this idea of nativism decrease or stay the same or increase? What's your projection?
I think we need to have a solution. I think we have to have a grand bargain, because everyone we talked about is American, whether you're nativist or non-nativist, right? Whether there's somewhere in between. And I think if you were to talk to individuals on both sides and in the middle, they would all agree that there's no clear plan for immigration. I think there needs to be a grand bargain that takes into consideration some of the characteristics that nativists deem as important and other ones that non-nativists do. Otherwise, I think this wound festers, at least for the next generation. It's not going away. It's a critical mobilizing factor because it goes to our identity of who we are. And when it comes to issues of who you are, you tend to defend those in a visceral sort of ardent way, right? So again, I think we need as a society some sort of solution to this. Otherwise, as I said before, it'll just fester.
And there are possibilities for solutions, right? I mean, there are potential compromises you can see, but you have to get beyond sort of the polarized politics of the contemporary moment. It's hard to see how you get there from here, but there were certainly compromises before we became more and on the table, including in the George W. Bush era, and you can easily see where these compromises could be fashioned as long as we can get people
But I would, I agree. I would just say, just to throw it out there, I would say, you know, ironclad border in the South, like a strong border control on the South, a moratorium for some time on immigration, looking forward some sort of economic orientation to who we select that comes in. And for those that are here illegally, there needs to be some sort of understanding that some should probably stay, others will have to leave, but all done with due process and humanity and humility. I think that some sort of, in broad conceptual frames like that would be the beginnings of some sort of grand bargain. You know, whether it happens or not, that's a whole other issue. But we don't see this issue going away unless everyone feels that they have basically bought into the new system.
From a political standpoint, you see examples around the world where if somebody kind of offers the opportunity, hey, let's create a grand bargain. Actually, they electorally become difficult because they're, people steal their base from them. They're not true believers anymore on either side, and so it does look for kind of the idea that new leadership is needed and some new thoughts.
Yeah, but you would ask about whether Trump sort of won on the issue, and I think he partly won on the issue, but on the other side, since he's taken, especially in after 2024 winning, he's pushed further than I think than at least, if you think about it being sort of a nativist group and then the nativist adjacent group and then another group up here, if you think of in terms of those blocks, he's gone too far in terms of some of the deportation stuff, and we often talk about politics as being like a thermostat, and when he does that, he loses some of his support, and so the issue's still driving, but he goes from sort of winning on the issue to losing on the issue because he's taken the policy too far, and I think that's where he is, and I think that's where the possibility for some sort of compromise comes out when people say, okay, he's gone too far. How do we come to some terms on this issue? I
agree with you, because I mean, if you look at just in the 10 months of the Trump administration, where they've deported 2 million people, but according to their own numbers, there's 15 million more out there like that. Well, that's not going to happen. And we know that from a practical standpoint, and so there has to be some new thinking on this issue.
Yeah, and I saw I saw a poll just today, Kaiser Family Foundation poll. I don't know if you saw it, but it's they're talking about even legal immigrants are very scared right now in terms of the policy that's in place, and so it's affecting everyone, even people whose status is not in question.
Isn't it true that the downfall for most politicians is overreach?
Yes.
Well, they're definitely overreaching. By the way, across the Trump agenda, there's overreach everywhere, including on immigration, including on deportation. We don't find a majority support for it at all. Yes, among Republicans, but not among immigrants and independents and Democrats. But what I would say about this, I don't think anyone should walk out saying I have a grand bargain. That probably won't work electorally speaking. But the next Democratic sort of candidate or series of candidates can have a plank of strong immigration policy coming out to talk about a strong border, a blue ribbon commission, bipartisan commission on the illegals, what to do. I mean, you could do a series of things that kind of pushes the ball or kicks the can down the road a bit. I would like to see that. You don't have to come out and say with some sort of a grand plan that looks more like the Wizard of Oz than something that's practical.
Well, I've always, as a political guy, and you wonder why some Democrat doesn't come along and take that off the table. Yeah. So we're going to have strong borders. We're going to decide who comes into our country and this type of thing, and it goes away as an issue.
Clinton-esque.
Yeah.
Yes.
Clinton, that was all about sort of welfare and sort of the economic agenda. Yeah, I think the Democrats need a Clinton-esque like figure. And by the way, a Clinton-esque like figure would be good for America too, because this issue, like I said before, will just fester until there's some sense that people feel like a degree of buy-in to what's going on.
So kind of a triangulation strategy, and I'm going to be above both parties and be right on the issue. And maybe that's
or not even that. Maybe you're a Democratic candidate that has a plank on immigration. Your plank on immigration has a couple of these strong measures. I mean, you don't have to necessarily be completely off diagonal to be successful on it.
So, Nativist Nation, what do you hope that this book does as people across America read this? What's the desired result?
I would say when we think about big picture about the world, and we often do that as pollsters with our clients or you all among academics and people and policy people that are studying it, I think we've gotten it wrong, at least in part, the broad forces. Populism, authoritarianism, among other sort of isms out there. Economic grievance as another one. Those are all important. But what we really believe is that nativism is this driving force when it comes to politics specifically. And we would like people to begin to reflect on that a bit. And that's important because if the problem is centrally a problem of, let's say, the rise of the authoritarianism or the rise of populism, there are very few solutions to that. But if the problem is nativism, there are solutions to that, and that's exactly what we talked about policy, some sort of consensus-based policy that deals with the issue of immigration. So we think that our book hopefully has a different view as to the general problems, the general trends, and there's ultimately ways to push it forward in next steps in terms of policy.
Yeah, one of the things we really wanted to get, I think, is the idea that nativism isn't a dirty word necessarily because it's so core. It's inescapable in politics. Every single society, and this is a global force, every single society has to answer this question: who counts and who doesn't count as an American or go a German? Take your and that's inescapable. You have to have that conversation. That's fundamental to politics. You can't get more base politics than that. So with that, we are now out of time. That's episode 35 of Inside Political Science. If this is your first time listening, click the subscribe button so you never miss an episode.
Inside Political Science is a production from KAMU, Aggieland's Public Television and Radio. For more information, visit tx.ag/insidepoliticalscience. Have a question for our experts? Email them at insidepolici@tamu.edu. Also, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss a new episode.